All right, we're COMP213, and it's week 9 actually, even though it says week 8 up here, it's week 9, lesson 9, part 1, and this is day 1 of our series, right? We ended off last time we got together, I talked a little bit about a little bit of layout and some learning outcomes for layout and design. I want to kind of hit this a little bit more because we kind of barely scratched the surface on this. I talked about this. The other thing I didn't talk about too much, I didn't finish off layout basics, which is something I wanted to kind of hit more last week. And I think we left off with talking about navigation schemes and so on. I want to kind of review that this week a little bit more and get those things pounded out as we move into forms this week and next week, right? Okay, so that's one thing. And going back into the schedule, I just wanted to kind of share this with you one more time. If I look at the schedule plan for this week and last week, so last week was week 8. It was our transition week from Professor Filati to me. So we did a little bit more setup. We did another little setup because we set up Visual Studio for the web. And we're supposed to cover chapters 6, 7, and a bit of 8. That's what we're supposed to do. And this week and next week, we're supposed to cover chapter 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of material from chapter 6, 7, and 8 and put it into this week and push 10 off probably until second day this week and maybe next week. Okay, just that way we have, because we're still going to cover it in the same time frame. Just I want to give you a little bit more time on this stuff because it's important to do this basic layout stuff, especially when we talk about the box model and some other additional CSS properties, and then getting to know how to publish. I want to do how to publish stuff through Visual Studio. So if I want to publish to your student web, how do I do that? Right? I think it's important for us to talk about that because I want you to use one tool, right? I don't want you to think about using FTP client like WSFTP or FileZilla or anything like that. You don't need to do that. As long as you have Visual Studio, you can do everything with one program. Right, so we'll talk about that today, or maybe next day. And then again, sometime this week, I want to try and give you assignment 4. I'm going to try and give it to you in day 2. Talk about assignment 4 a little bit, what that is. So to give you a little bit of time to get ready, because it's probably going to be due, my guess is week 11, when your project, we give you your project for the first time, which is for your final project. Okay, any questions from last week at all? I know you guys had some, getting used to me and also setting up Visual Studio for those people who wanted to do that. Is everyone set up properly for working now? Good. If you're not set up properly, again, you can always use Expression Web. Everything I talk about here can work with Expression Web. It can also work with if you're someone who likes brackets, as an example, right? Or if you want to work with Sublime Text. Again, like I say, I'll say again, it doesn't have to be Visual Studio because the web can work even with the text editor. That's fine too. You don't have to have any kind of code hinting at all in IntelliSense. I think it's good because I think if you have these things, then it makes it easier for you to work, but it's not required. So we talked about last time about this basic 2-column layout, this idea, and I'm going to bring up Visual Studio just so we can follow along as well, just so we can kind of be on the same page here. I'm sorry? I'm going to try I'm going to try and go back to that other document that we did, which was part 2, right, which is this one here. I'm going to bring it up. Now again, these files are the same kind of files I put up on GitHub, right? So, and for example, last time we kind of created a document that looks like this, right? With and what we want to try and do, we made the kind of our little navigation scheme up at the top, right? And I covered this in our I covered this when we talked about stuff online with my videos, how to do one of these things, right? A little navigation scheme. In our PowerPoint, it talks about doing a side nav, which is very similar to what we did when we did a top nav, right? The challenge and the things we want to try and do, if we want to set up multiple column layout, how do we do that? Now this is a 2-column layout. How do we do a 2-column layout, right? And if I go back to here to talk about a 2-column layout, just to review, we have, again, the header, we have our main, we have our footer. This is what we have right now, header, main, and footer. If we want to make our nav a side nav, in addition to a top nav, maybe the side nav is going to be secondary navigation as opposed to primary navigation. So when you click on your primary nav, then your side nav gives you different options, almost like a drop down if you wanted to do it. And maybe you include, or maybe you don't have your scheme for your page does not use a top nav. It only uses a side navigation, right? Those kind of things as well. So you can, this is the structure. You need these things: a header, a nav, a main, and a footer, right? Your main would be, of course, your main structure. And your footer, like we talked about before, would be some footer information about the company and so on. Maybe even a secondary nav down here. A lot of more popular websites these days use a secondary navigation on the bottom inside the footer, as well as primary navigation in the header. Right? Navigating in your pages is really, really important, and you need to know how to do that for basic design. Right? So again, what we're talking about in this particular case for a basic two-column layout is you've got an overall page wrapper, right, which we already have. We have our header, we have our footer, we have our main equivalent, right? And now we have our nav, but right now our nav, if you notice, is inside of our header. Let's go there, and so let's check that out. So here's our nav, right? It looks like it's kind of like it goes from one side of the screen to the other, and on the bottom we have our footer. This is our footer. Here, if you notice, the reason why this gray is bleeding outside the lines, right, is because we have padding, right, or padding between the div tags here, right, these content tags, and you know, the actual margin of our wrapper. Let's take a look at that. So if I go back to my code, right, again, it's just pure HTML. So we have our header, right? Here's our header, and we have our footer, right? Our footer. Our footer and our header right now are outside of the wrapper in our particular model that we're using, right? Inside of our wrapper, we have a couple of things. We have our main content, which, by the way, right now it's called, we're using a section tag for that, which is main content. But you can certainly use something called main, right? Main is also okay to use, right? You can just change this to main, right? Then you have another section, which is a gallery, a photo gallery that we have. So there's a couple of sections here, right? And on the bottom you have a footer. Now our nav, we've positioned outside of our, it's inside of our header. This is our header. Our header includes our nav, right? And it doesn't have any other content. In this example, our header is separate from our nav, right? When we use our header here, a navigation on the left. Right? That's what this two-column layout is showing us. We can do the same thing, right? Instead of our nav being on the left and our main content being here, we could certainly put something else over here. Like, for example, what if we wanted to put our main content on the left and our photo gallery on the right, or our photo gallery on the left, and when you click on the photo, you get your main content changing on the right. You know, these are things you could probably do, right? So let's do that. Let's put our we have two things. We have our main and our nav in this example. We're going to make our photo gallery, which is this, in this section here. We're going to make this float on our left. How do we do that? Right now, if you notice with the CSS that we're using here, we're saying for our nav, which is, it's going to be, our photo gallery is going to take the place of our nav. We're going to use float left, right? That's our whole photo gallery, right? A fixed width. Look, fixed width of 150 pixels, which I don't recommend typically. This is kind of like an absolute layout, right? Because this means it's always going to have 150 pixels. This is neat, the 150 pixel thing idea, right? But the problem with it is it'll always stay fixed, right? You gotta think about this scheme a little bit differently. Our main doesn't have our margin left is 160 pixels. So what it does, it actually pushes to the right 160 pixels, so it actually appears over here on the right hand side, right? And if I was to do that, if I was to go back here, and let's look at our CSS, right? Right now we have just our wrapper, and we have some CSS that we've lined up for our footer, right? Our section, each section, as an example, not just our header section, but each section has this information. Now we have a new section, a new thing called main, right? And main is what we're going to push across, which is going to take the place of our content, like over here, right? We're going to take this main right here, and I'm going to copy this exact thing, right? I'm going to pop it in here before our section. Let's write this in. So here's our main, right? And our main is margin left 160. We'll try this out, right? Our padding of 10 pixels. Our background color is going to be white in this particular case, a little bit different, right? In our section, this section is going to be where we're going to have our gallery, our photo gallery, right? And I'm saying that the padding is 10, the margin is 15, and our overflow is auto. This is okay, right? But once I start putting, if I put a section here that if I say my float is left, take a look. Like this is one of the things it's asking us to do. Float left. And this is the first thing we put in, float left. Float left. Now remember we talked about floating. What floating does is it pushes the content around, right, so that it goes next to each other. Okay, margin left. The other thing that this section that we did here in our nav is declare a width of 150. Let's do that. Let's say, you know what, our section, we're going to have 150 pixels, just to be the same as our example, right? So we're going to say our section is going to be a width of 150 pixels, a fixed width. Okay, this is what they're asking us to do first. Okay, let's see the effects of that on our page. Going with the same example, I'm going with COMP213 Lesson 8 Part 2 as an example, and it's already on GitHub for those of you who are following. So I'm going to run this thing and see what happens, see how messed up this thing gets. All right, so we got some issues, right? We've got our hello world, right? This is our hello world. This is our main content, right? And this is our photo gallery, right? But immediately I don't notice an issue. Oh, there it is. I have to refresh. Okay, this is what we get now. What happened? What happened? Look. So I've got this big space over here, our hello world over here, our photo gallery over here, right? Take a look. And our copyright over here. Right, let's fix that. Let's go back to our copyright. Our footer is text align center, font style italic, background color, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Our main is this, our padding, our background color they made white, right? We can do that. So let's go back to our background color. Let's add a background color to our main content. Here's our main content. Our background color is white, right? And for our section, which is our nav, we don't have a background color, right? For our footer and for our header, we have different colors. We have CCCC, FF for our background color. So I'm going to do the same thing, just so we see the same things, right? For our footer, not for our, because our nav, our header is a little bit different because our header contains our navigation right now. Okay, so for our footer, here's our footer. Right here, I'm going to do is just put a background color and just rerun this thing. Just reformat it. What it looks like right now. So you're going to get something like this. Okay, so my question to you, right, because we're learning together, right, why do I have my photo gallery, which is just a section, way over here, right, and my hello world, which is another main, way over here? Why? How come it's not showing us the way it's supposed to show us, which is our hello world on the right, and you know our photo gallery on the left? And how come this photo gallery, as an example, has these big pictures that are cut off? How come? How come? Well, there's a couple things, right? First of all, our photo gallery has fixed size pictures. Like we fixed that in another time before. So let's go there. So if I look at my gallery, which is my section, right? I have a float of left, right? My width of 150 pixels. And my images, if I go down to my images, so here's my wrapper for my entire thing, right? That's my wrapper. But where do I address my images from my section? I don't have, here's my image. The only thing I put for my image is my padding, my float is left for my images. They float next to each other, right? And my padding is 10. Well, what I can put for my images here is the size of my images, right? So right now my size is whatever they are, right? There's no control. They're going to flow as big as they're going to flow, right? But I want them to be some kind of size that's going to be a maximum width, right? I know that I have 150 pixels to play with, right? So I don't want my images, if I'm going to have a padding of 10, and if I take them from both sides and the top, right, that means I'm going to lose 20 pixels. So for 150, if I take 20 pixels away, I only have 130 pixels. So the maximum size I want my images to be is 130, right? Let's try that. So I'm going to go here to my padding. I'm going to go max width, right, 130 pixels. I can never want my images to be more than 130 pixels. Let's see what that does, all right, as we go through this. So we'll go back to here. First of all, let me refresh. And let's see what I get. Okay, cool, my images, I can see them now, right? Take a look. I see my images. They're all in that little photo gallery thing, right? I also see this big block of gray, right? How come, how come? Well, this is my wrapper, right? And my wrapper, the reason why this is looking the way it is, let's take a look at the, let's put a box. Remember we did this, we did some troubleshooting before, right? And the troubleshooting that I did before was I put a border around my containers to see what the borders look like. So let's put a border around my wrapper, right? To see what my wrapper looks like. We don't have that right now. So I'm going to go back to this. And if I look at my wrapper, here's my wrapper. Wrapper is just a container that contains everything, right? It should exclude or not include my navigation and my footer. Should not be included in my wrapper right now the way I've made it, okay? But let's put a border around everything. So I'm going to say border. Remember how we did this last time? We said, if you follow the code hinting here, it says, how big is the border? 1 pixel, let's say, right? We'll make it solid, and we'll make it red, just so that way it stands out. So we know what the wrapper is. Now, it's hovering over here, it says, 1 pixel is not a valid value for border property. So I typed L instead of 1. There we go. Okay, so there's 1 pixel solid red, right? And let's take a look and see what it does. So if I refresh, then now we see that this is our up here. This is the only thing that's included in our container. But how come? Hold on a second. We know my photo gallery's in there. How come it's pushed over here down underneath? How come? How come? It's pushed over here underneath because remember we talked about overflow values. Our container, right, is not, this is outside. This whole gallery section is floating outside of our container, right? So if I go back to my wrapper, right, I don't have any overflow property. What if I included an overflow property in here? So if I said like overflow, like we did that last time, auto, right? If I did this, overflow auto for my wrapper, my whole wrapper, my page wrapper, wraps everything together, right? Let's see what happens now if that fixes me. Let's refresh. Oh, hey, look, I got my photo gallery, and now it's inside, but I got a bit of an issue here. How come this thing here is still floating on this side? Well, there's a couple big issues, right? I've got a little bit of margin on this side, which is pushing this thing, so it's not quite 150 pixels. 150 pixels plus 10 pixels, 160 pixels, right? And what I wanted to push it over, if you notice what I did, let's go back to this code here, right? I said, and this is where absolute values is no good, right? Well, not for me, not the way I design, right? I said our main left, I want my margin left to be 160. Well, I can't have 160 because I've got my border, each side has 10 pixel padding around everything else, right? Like if you notice, my padding is 10 pixels around my section, both sides. That means that it can't just be 150. It's got to be at least 170 instead of 160. It's got to be at least 170 because you have to add my width plus 10 pixels on each side. 170 minimum, right? That's what it has to be for this to function. So let's change this value to 170 in our example. And let's see if that's enough. That may not be enough because I also have a padding of 10 inside of my main content. Let's see how that works out. Because we want to get these two next to each other, right? Okay, closer. It's almost there. But see, there's still a bit of a border issue because this also pushes this thing around, right? And I've got to push this over more, right? This first option, this first content here, this one, to make our true thing. This is coming over here. This is doing what it's supposed to do, but I don't have enough push over. Let's go push it more. Let's make this, instead of 170, let's make it 200 and see what happens. Right? Just so see it's more dramatic. Right? And I'm going to refresh. Almost. Still not quite the same. right, for 200, right? Let's make it more. Right? Let's make it more. Let's see what it does now, right? Okay, good. So now we've got enough. How come this, right, is still over here and not over here? Well, there's ways to tell, right? This red border is the border for our wrapper. Let's see what the border, it looks like the border for our first main content right here is this. Let's just confirm that, right? Because we've got a bit of an issue here. We'll talk about that in a second. So we got a couple things. So one, our section is 150. Our margin, oh, see? Look at our section. Not only does it have, it has padding, but it also has margin. I think we got to take this away. That's going to mess us up even more. All right, let's check this out now. Close. So it pushed it off over here and took away this extra margin from over here, right? Took away that. Still not quite floating on the right. Right? It's not doing this two-column layout, right? Again, look at all the things that you need to do, right? Hold wrapper, our float left, padding 10 for our navigation. That's cool. So then we look at 150 plus 10 is 170. Margin left is 160 plus 10 is 170 for a thing, and then plus this extra thing. But how come? It's not floating over there. Well, there's a couple of other problems. What is contained in here, right, is what we're fighting with. We're struggling because inside of our section, which is really called our gallery, a photo gallery, we've got other things in here which are pushing things around, which is our images, and they're also floating left, right? An example of this would be if I took away my overflow for a second. I'm just going to take away some of these things to see what happens, right? There's two ways to do this, by the way. You can do it here in code, and if you want to try it out in Google Chrome, you can disable CSS on the fly, right, to get our layout. So let's do it here. We'll just disable it by making this a comment, right? So, sorry, that's the right way to do it. We're just going to push take this in, and we'll cut it and put it in here so we just don't forget it. Okay, just commented the overflow out, and we know what's going to happen with this section, right? When we don't overflow our section, our images are going to flow outside of it. Let's take a look and see how that works. Right? We'll go back. Yeah, untabify everything. Okay, so there's our section. We've just taken off this overflow value, right? And when I go over here and refresh, right, seems like we're okay still. Why? We've limited our images to max width of 150 or whatever it is, right? Or 130. So now, do I really expect things to flow left, to overflow left? Because if I go here, this is the problem with absolute positioning, right? My absolute positioning states that I'm always going to have 130 pixels for this whole thing, this whole container. My containers aren't fluid, right? Here, when I say a fixed number of pixels to the left, from the left border, it does do what I want it to do, this hello world, right? Hello world does get pushed over, right? But what I really want is for my photo gallery to appear on the left and my hello world to appear on the right, right? The new modern way teaches us that we want to do things in order from left to right, right, typically. So how do I arrange that from left to right? Well, if I go back to my HTML, right, I've got my section, which is my gallery, right? Here's my gallery. I've got my main, which is my content. And if I want my gallery to float on the left first, or be on the left, and my main content to be on the right, the other way to do it is to reorder this stuff. So take my section out of here first and put it before or underneath my wrapper, like this. So now here's my section, my gallery first. Here's my main content, right? And it's going to flow from left to right. Let's see how this works. Left to right, ordering, right? even though I've pushed things over, the reason why it flowed over here, the reason why I changed it all is because I reorganized my structure inside my HTML page. Right? I know that I want my photo gallery to appear on my left, and I know I want my hello world, my main content to appear on my right, and so I've done these things. Okay, couple other things that I need to do. This is great. I've got my 2-column layout, and I can add to this 2-column layout by adding additional content. Let's do that. How do I add additional content? Remember from last week? I want to add some more paragraph tags and some more content in here under my main content. Couple strategies. I could use nested containers, right, in my structure. Now we're talking HTML5. We're moving to that structure, okay? So typically what I like to do is, even if I have my main, this is my main container right here. This main container, right, could be the container for more than one section. Now I could use div as a container. I can use section as a container. What we want to try and work out is, it's HTML5 we want to talk about, right? So if I want to say that each of these sections of content is a div, I could do that. I could do something like this. Watch. So I get div. And once I have my other container, I could take this first area here of content, right? Still we're talking about main content, but I could do this, right? Or if this is my first article, going back to semantic HTML, we know that article is also a tag, right? So I'm going to go article. That makes more sense. So this is my first article, right, in my document. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to copy and paste this whole thing. So here's my article. And all I'm doing is layering my content. And let's make this an H2 tag. We'll say this is second heading. Second heading, right? And that's my second article. This is my first article. You know what? My first article, I want to give it a tag. I want to give it an ID tag of, first article, right? And I'm probably going to do the same thing. I want to tag up my stuff. And the reason why we use IDs and classes is so that we can specifically style these sections, as opposed to leave it to the, to the mercies of the gods. We don't want that. We want to kind of style it and also talk about this. It says element article requires an end tag. Yeah, because I changed this by accident. There we go. Okay, let's do it again. So this is my second article. Let's do one more article. So first article, second article, third article. And our third article is also going to be an H2 tag. So let's start third heading. Third heading. And let's see how much content we've added now. So I've got a few different pieces of content right now. So first article with hello world, second article with second heading, and third article with the third heading. Okay. Again, this should be renamed. First article. My ID should be separate, right? IDs, remember, if you remember between the difference between IDs and classes as a review, IDs for one element, classes for more than one element. So if I do this is second article, if I want to target this whole section, right? And third article. So 1, 2, 3 articles, and they're all names as such. That's all I'm doing. I'm just tagging them so we can name them. Okay, let's see how we got now, right? So I'm going to go back to here and refresh. Okay, more of an article. It looks like it spans a little bit more space. If I want to really make this span more, like these are all 50, lorem 50 is what I've used here, my shortcut. If I want to give this more, what's the fancy way to do it? How do I use my shortcut? What's the shortcut to add lorem text? Come on, guys. I showed you guys last week. You can type it yourself. Type some gobbledygook or grab some lorem text from the web. Lorem 50, yeah. Or lorem 100 or lorem 200, whatever you want to use, right? So if I want to say this is my first article, my hello world, my second heading is going to include more stuff. I want to have like 100 words or 150 words. And my third article is going to be like a closing article with only 100. So 150 and 100. Let's see if we can do that. Just from a layout perspective. Well, I'm going to get rid of all this. So get rid of all this. Here's my P tag in my second article. I'm just going to type in right here, lorem, let's say 200. Right? So this is a much bigger lorem section. Big article. This is the main content of our article. Right? And then, and then the third article, we want to make it also bigger, right? But we don't want to make it quite as big as the as the second article. We want to make it smaller, just from a layout perspective, just to fit it in. So we're going to make this lorem 100. So we said lorem 200, lorem 100, and then lorem 50 for our introductory paragraph. And this is what this would be called. This would be, instead of a hello world, let's change this. So this would be our introduction, right, to our article, whatever the introductory heading is, right? It's our second heading for our paragraph, right? And our third heading would be like our conclusion, right? Let's see how that goes. That's enough. And again, you can play with the values a little bit differently, right? Let's see if that's enough. There you go. That's a little better, right? So it gives us a little bit more content to work with. And you can see how it flows. I've got my content on the left, my content on the right, and then these two things flow, right? This is great from a fixed page perspective. But remember, we're talking mobile, and this flows nicely on the right until here, right? Which it doesn't really stack well, right? If anything, what we want to do is when our page comes to this big, maybe we want to get rid of some of these pictures or put them into thumbnails or just reduce the size of these pictures as we go until they're much smaller, right? That's what we may want to do here. And the other thing is that this pictures stay the same size. Our max width, it always stays the same size no matter what we do here, right? And also, here's another thing. From a layout perspective, if you notice, it always has a margin of 190 or 200. Well, maybe you got to think about it. When we get to this small, you're not going to see much of your text. And also, there's this gray box here that I want to get rid of, right? Because it looks kind of ugly to me. So how do we do that? Also, our navigation scheme has to change, right? So how do we do that kind of stuff? Well, let's go back. First of all, let's check the bottom. Our copyright statement looks okay. That's good. We have a top nav, and then we have our left side and our right side. What do we do? Well, what we need to do, if we go back to our CSS, right, is, again, I've taken the section overflow away. It's just come off because we don't need to use their overflow. We've got a fixed width of 150 pixels. And if we look at the entire page and say, if I'm planning stuff, how much of my page do I want it to devote to my gallery? How much, what percentage of my page? If 80%, I've got 80% of my page because if you remember, we talked about our wrapper having 80% of our entire page. It's going to always be centered in the middle somewhere. And we're going to have 20% for the sides, 10% on one side and 10% for the other side, always, right? When we have this wrapper thing going on. That means we're sitting in 10%. So how many 10% sections do we want to assign to this is the way I like to think about it, to our gallery? How much percentage? 20%? 30%? I wouldn't say more than 30%, right? So let's try that as an option. First, we're not going to change the wrapper, and we're not going to change our main content pushover, which is this margin left 220 yet, right? But what I want to do is I want to change this width to percentages. This is one concept you can use. It's called a fluid layout, right? Let's try this. So instead of 150 pixels, we're going to say, hey, you know what, Tom? I want 30%. 30% of our section, all sections are 30%. Now, again, I haven't named this section. I could have called it, instead of section, it's really the gallery. I could have targeted gallery as well. But I want to say all sections take up 30% in this particular case. Let's see how that works. So when I go back to our page, let's look at it right here and refresh. Okay, so now take a look at this, how I pushed it over. So 30% is a little bit too big, but however, if I scroll down, as I go down here, and I get smaller, you can see how this is 30% now. See how this is 30%? Well, this is a good thing, right? But I think 30% might be a little bit too, might be pushing it a little bit too much. Maybe 25% might be better, right? So I think this is the thing. This is the border right here. This is the border for our photo gallery, right? So this is 30%, almost 1/3 of the page, right? I don't think I want that. I think I want to go down to 25%. Okay, that makes sense, right? So 25%, and I've got out of the entire 80%, I've allocated 25%, right, for my photo gallery. How much is left out of the 80? If we take 80 minus 25, how much is left for our content? 55%, right? If we made it anything less than 55%, you're going to have a float of 5%, which means it's going to mess things up a little bit. So let's try that. Let's say instead of margin left, right, 220 pixels, what if we were just to say something like our main content, right, is 55%, like our width is 55%. Let's see what that does. So what we'll do is we'll kind of try a couple different things here, because I think, you know, these days what you want to try and do is make our page more responsive. This is one of our first things we do with responsive design, by the way. Have some kind of fluid layout, all right? So our width is going to be 55%. Let's see what happens when we say that. Now it's going to mess up our layout. You're going to see what's going to happen. We're going to have to rejig a couple of things, but there's going to be a good desired effect as well. Okay, let's refresh this now. Okay, cool. So this is 55%. This looks like it'll fit. Now they're layered one on top of the other, right? One on top of the other. The reason why our introduction starts there is because we're really starting from the left margin, right? That's what's happening. Okay, and they're layered one on top of the other. Just see this extra space over here? This extra space is where I want this other article to go. Now I've taken away the 150 pixels. I've said, you know, I want it to be a fluid layout, right? How do I do that? Well, if I go back, our main content, right, which is right here, has a width of 55, right? This is cool. What if I made this float left as well? If I said float left, right? If I float left of my parent container, that's what it means, right? Let's see what happens now. All right, I'm going to refresh. Ah, now it's a little better, right? Still got this little dead space here, right? I got this little dead space here. And this is good, all right? A couple things that we have to look at here. First of all, the dead space exists on here and here, right? So we've got our photo gallery. I still think 25% is too big, still, right? Okay, and we still got this 55%, right? 55%. Now, what is the 55% of? Is it 55% of the entire screen or 55% of our wrapping container? And that's the question you have to answer. If it's the wrapping container, right, then out of 100%, instead of working with 80, and if I give 25% to this, that means this introduction is going to have 75%, not 55%. Let's see that. Let's see if that makes it. If we're right, this will span almost the entire thing over here, right? Let's take a look and see what that happens. So we'll do that. We'll say instead of 55%, we'll go to 75%. Let's see what happens, right? And we'll refresh. And oh man, what happened? Oh man, it got pushed down all the way down here. How come? How come? Right? That's good though, because what it's saying is, look at, we have this space right over here, but we've got margins and we've got padding, and that throws off our 55% because our margin and padding is in pixels, fixed pixels that take away from our 75 and 25, right? It adds on to it. So it can't be 75 and it can't be 25 with a 10 pixel padding, right? Because pixels are fixed. Percentage is percentage, right? So that's the other challenge that we're going to have. And this is where we're going to have another discussion later on of should we move to something called M's as opposed to percentages or pixels. But let's change this. So instead of 75% is good, our padding, let's say if we wanted to make it clear, you know, what our padding would be, and again, we could certainly accommodate for this by saying, well, you know what, 10 pixels is probably about 5, not more than 5%. So let's take away 5, you know, take this down to 70 and try that out, right? We could kind of, it's a sham. It's kind of a shimmy that we're trying to do, like a little a workaround, right? And we do that, and it pops to the left, right? Almost exactly, look. So 5% is about 10 pixels in this particular scenario, for me. For you, it might be slightly different because your resolution might be different than mine, and your picture is much bigger than mine, or your resolution is much better, and so you won't have what I'm getting, right? As I go down, however, let's go down. As I want to scrunch this down, you notice what happens. It pops down here, right? One on top of the other. I don't want that to happen. I want our articles to stay at the top and our photo gallery to pop down, right? That's what I definitely want. How do I take care of this thing, right? These are the kind of questions we have to ask ourselves, because as I continue to pop down, it says, hey, it's 75%, right? 75%, look at the actual leftover here, 75% of the entire container, right? This is 25%, but what's happening here is our pictures, our images, right, have a fixed width. We've said no greater than 150 pixels, right? This is what we're mixing units up. We have issues, right? I'm just pointing this out to you so you understand the complexities that we're doing here with the layout like this, all right? So our images have a padding of 10, right? Which we also know means something like 5%, right? Something like that. Our maximum width of 130 makes no sense anymore because we're working within percentages now. If my section is 25%, right, we said a width of 25%, a fixed width again. And we said a fixed width of 70%. What we may want to say is our max width is 70% and our max width is 25%. That's the first thing. And then the same thing goes with our image. Instead of our max width being 130, we don't want to let our image ever go that big. We want a max width of 20, something like that. Because it's got to be less than our container. So max width of 20%. And we're changing our pixels to percentages. All right. Let's try this out again and see what happens. Let me run this thing. Okay. Now this is the other problem we're going to run into. We've got a bit of thumbnails going on, right? Why? Because they're going to stretch to fit the container. And this works nicely when it comes to this, but I don't want it to float left anymore. I want our images to be one on top of the other. So that's one thing I got to change. Let's do that. So our images, right now they float left. I don't want our images to float left in our scenario, right? That's the first change, right? Again, we're changing our layout, right? All right, so there's our images, 25%. Maximum width, 25%. But hold on, is it 25% of my container or 25% of my photo gallery? What's the percentage of? What's my 25%? What I really mean is I want it to be 80%, just like we did before, of our photo gallery container. Remember, the percentages is container specific. So now let's go back. We're making these changes to understand when we say width, percentages, what they mean, right? All right, so max width for our section is 25% of our wrapper, right? Max width of our image, 20% can't be. It's got to be 80% of our section. And I'll explain this in more detail in a second. Aha, right? Now, when I move in like this, and I scrunch in, it's still 80% of our section. I don't like the fact that this goes down here. That's bad. I want it, and look, our photo gallery kind of moves outside of this as well. I don't like the photo gallery, words of the photo gallery coming outside of my section. That's not good. It's got to, we got to work with this. It's got to crunch in there as well, right? How do I do that? Okay, and we still got a fixed width, right? Fixed width of our padding. This is a problem too. And I want my images to kind of hover in the middle, not just on the left or the right, in the middle of my photo gallery section. I want to do that. So how do I do that? Let's go back. We're going to fix one problem at a time. Like we're just fixing until we have a kind of more of a responsive layout, right? To some degree. There's still a lot of other things we can do with media queries and so on. But we know that our images right now have a padding of 10, which is a fixed padding. Here's an example that I like to look at. This padding example. where I have my margin left and margin right of auto, right? Margin left and margin right of auto. I like that auto word. That's good, right? Can we do something like that with padding? So if I have my image, instead of my padding being 10 pixels, right, as an example, could I have not my, I'll say something like this, if I go padding, do I have auto as an option, right? Well, if I go margin, right, just in a second, what are my options? I have, see, look down here, I have an auto comes up for a margin, right? So padding, I don't have auto down here as an option. It doesn't come up as an option that I can use. So what if I did this? What if I said margin left, right, auto, and the same thing with margin right. So I'll just drop these down here for a second. Let's see what happens. What does margin apply to again? Between elements, right? Margin left and margin right of auto. What does this do for me? Does it really do what I want? It's for each image box. That's what it is, right? Nothing. Why? For a couple of reasons. One, and this is why you may be tempted. You'd be forgiven to think that you could do something like this, right? Because we did it down here. Say, wait, a wrapper, margin left, margin right, auto. But what's the rule? We try not to use margins inside of other containers. Margins should be only for the outer container, typically, right? Okay, so if I go, as an example, margin left and margin right of auto, we could do that. How about if we did padding, our padding left, because all we care about is padding left. We don't really care about padding right. Look what it says. Our option is 2M. Padding left, right, option of 2 M's. Remember what are M's? They're the size of an M, the width of a typical M, right now in our scheme. Now our scheme, we said our font size is 20 pixels, right? So 2 M's, right, because we've made our font size fixed 20 pixels, right, is 40 pixels right now. That's the size of our M's. That's pretty darn big, right? So maybe a padding left of 1M or even less than that would be okay. Let's try that out. So we'll say padding left, right, of 1M. Let's see what that does and how much padding it gives us. So here's what it looks like now. And refresh. And then, ooh, look how much they pushed that over, right? Now that means that if I scrunch this up down here, my M is staying the same. Take a look. My M is staying the same size. If I was going to use M's, right? It's not changing size. My M, because my M isn't changing, my M is the same size, right? I always have the same problem. So I think we got to stick with percentages here. Otherwise, we're going to have M's and pixels, and they're the same thing. An M is the number of pixels depending on our size, right? M's are great. We're going to use them later on. But just in case, if we're following the IntelliSense, what it says. So what if we said, okay, our margin width, maximum width is 80, but my padding left is 10% of our size, and our padding right, let's see if we did this, padding right is also 10%, right? Now what do we get? Do we get the same effect that we're looking for? Here's my changes, and refresh. Oh, that looks better. It looks centered. Let's take a look. Look, it's always centered to a fault until it gets down here, until photo gallery is outside of our page, right? Photo gallery should really shrink down, right? When it gets to this point. Okay, we got a problem with photo gallery now. Photo gallery isn't centered, right? It's not even got, it doesn't have the same margin even, right? We want to probably push this to the left a little bit. Photo gallery, okay? So we know that our H1, H2, H3, H4 has a padding of 10 pixels. Oh man, more padding with fixed width when we use percentages, bad, right? So it's either 5 or 10%, right? That's what you want to kind of use. Let's use, just to stay the same, we'll say our padding. Now remember, this is padding all around, right? If I said padding of 10%, that's huge. right? We got to be very careful here. So we may want to do something like this. Padding left, this is where we kind of get more specific. Padding left, right, of, you know, again, 10%. I like that, right? Let's try this out. Padding right for all headings. Padding right of 10%. Wait, right and left. Can't we, isn't there a short form for this? There is. And, you know, padding top and bottom. Oh man, top, bottom, left, right. Maybe we can do mixed percentages and pixels. Maybe we can do that. So padding then, top and bottom, would be 10 pixels. That's okay. For top and bottom, it's okay. But left and right is 10%. Can we do that? Mix pixels with percentages? Let's see what that does for us. Looks okay. This is kind of weird. Right? Left and right, 10% is huge on these things. Right? Pushes it too much. But look at the percentage, how it looks over here. This looks nice. Right? Wait. What does this mean? We want to move our photo gallery like this, but we don't want to change our introduction and second heading like this. It was looking fine the way it was. Bing! That means I want to target my photo gallery with CSS. That's what I want to do. I want to target this photo gallery. I don't want to target introduction or second heading, which means what I did was wrong. I don't want to target all things like this, right? I want to use specificity to target my photo gallery so that my padding is this, 10%, 10 pixels and 10%, but only for my gallery, not for the other ones. How do I do that? So, I have to remember what my gallery is. So let me go back to 10 pixels for a second. Bear with me. And if I scroll down, I have my wrapper. And did I make did I name my section? I did. I called it gallery, my ID. So I could say this. My gallery, all H2 tags, which is this one, all H2 tags. Within my gallery, I want to follow a different schema. How do I do that? Well, I got to go into my main CSS, and I'm going to do it down here, right? So I'm going to say all div tags that are in my gallery, all H2 tags that are in my gallery are going to have, right, padding. I'm going to bring this up for you guys to see. Padding, top and bottom 10 pixels, right and left 10%. So I only want to target that, not all H2 tags, right? Let's see how that looks as I refresh my screen. Still got my nice little padding over here. Take a look, right? But it doesn't affect this one at all, or this one, because I've specifically told it I want to target my gallery. Hey, this is cool, but I want my padding, I want some more padding around. I didn't define padding for my pictures up and down, right? This is where I can add some fixed pixels to the top. Reason why, a question for you guys, just as an interactivity here. Why is it okay to use fixed pixels for top and bottom in this example, as opposed to a percentage? Why is that true? Anybody? We can use pixels because we can scroll down, up and down, right? We can't scroll left and right comfortably, and we shouldn't scroll left and right in our pages. Scrolling left and right in our pages, creating scroll bars for ourselves, it's a bad thing, right? So if we can avoid scroll bars and scroll down, that's okay, because this container is going to expand to fit our pictures. But I would like some separation between our pictures on the top and the bottom. I don't want to use percentages because we don't know how big our screen is going to be, how tall. But we can use some fixed pixels like 10 pixels or 5 pixels, right? I think at least 5 or 10 pixels would be appropriate here. Or an M, whatever you want to say. One character between these two things. Okay, let's do that. Let's do 10 pixels. Again, there's dangers to doing all this stuff, and when we get into more responsive design, we'll fix some of the problems we're going to get, because there's still going to be issues here. But at least we'll have a little bit of padding. Okay, padding left and right, 10. Padding bottom and top. Oh man, we're back into that scenario again. So I can go do this. I can say padding top and bottom, 5 pixels, right? Padding left and right, 10%. And I can get rid of these two, right? Again, we're just rejigging our design a little bit. Let's try this out. Refresh. All right. We're getting our images coming in nicely. Let's take a look. We got this separation on the bottom and the top, right? And we've got our left and right percentages. And as we refresh here and we move through here, we still got an issue we got to fix, which is this one, where it floats to the left. It kind of drops in here because you know what? Probably, in my opinion, we need a little bit less than 70%. And we also have some fixed widths for our padding, right, that we need to use for our article, right? Because our articles right now, they have a fixed padding of left and right. This is where we have to deal with this, right? So if I go back to my main, I have a maximum width of 70. My padding, though, is 10. It's always 10. It's never going to be less than 10, right? So that's a problem again. So again, I don't want to use my padding more than 5%. 5% is huge, right? 5, as an example, will be the first left and right. Top and bottom, maybe I'll use 10 pixels. So then it can do something like this. Top and bottom, right, 10 pixels. Left and right, 5%. See if I try that out, how that works for me. See if that fixes my issue, first of all. Okay. Actually makes it worse, right? Why? Because it gives me that 5%. It's huge, right? Look how big that is. That's even bigger than before, right? That's the thing we want to get rid of. Okay, so 5% is too big, but we're on the right track, right? What if we drop this down to 1%, right? 1% of our right and left is 2% total. It's kind of an odd number, but let's experiment and see what it does for us. Hey, there it is. 1% in this particular context looks great. And if I go in, zoom in, okay, we got a couple of other issues, right? It looks like we're zooming in, we're scrunching in here, right? And we still got this issue because these two together with our percentages and everything else, because remember, we have a fixed percentage here of like 5%, or whatever it is percent, right? Let's count them up and see how it goes, because this is how we have to do it. So approximately 72%, right, for this piece, 72%. And then we have our section that's 25% plus a padding. Oh man, what did I do? I made a padding of 10% for a whole section. I can't do that. Let's put in a 1%. You see where I'm going, right? The idea is once you stick with, you have to stick with one or the other. Once you stick with absolute layout in pixels, it's only good for one screen, right? Percentages can work on more screens. Now, not every screen, because you're still going to have a problem. You're going to see, right? Let's check this out. 1%, refresh. Okay, this is good. It's a little better. And if I scrunch in, right, I want to see if it goes to the small screen before it crunches down. Yay! Right? It works all the way down here like this. These images get a little bit small, to be honest with you. I'm not happy with how big these are, right? But everything is centered. My images stay centered. I can still come left and right. Now my navigation is a problem. My navigation, right, I can also, if I'm smart, I can also split off my navigation. If I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 links, what I might want to do is separate my home, product, and services, right? Because look, home, products, and services can probably fit here, right? And if I want to make this home, product, services, about me, and contact me, always do this, right? 2 layers. I could do that by creating containers that wrap around home, products, and services, about me, and contact me, and do the same trick, right? Any questions around this 2-column layout? My 2-column flexible layout, as opposed to 2-column absolute layout. So what's the difference between absolute and relative? We're going to talk about that today. And what I'm trying to do with you guys here, by trial and error, it looks like by fire, is use a responsive layout so that it works with more screens. Okay, one thing I need to get rid of still is this ugly gray background. Where is this ugly gray background anyway? Well, It's contained in my wrapper. I know that. So here's my wrapper. Here's my gray background. Let's just kill it. And you know what? We can probably start killing a lot of these other things too. Like for example, I know that I don't need this overflow for my section anymore, right? Because I'm not going to do a padding left, so I can get rid of that. And you know what? I don't need to do this margin left anymore, a fixed margin of 220 pixels, so I can get rid of that. Right. Just cleaning things up a little bit. Okay. So we look pretty good. You know what? I don't need to do any more testing, so I want to get rid of my border. So I'm going to get rid of my border. And get rid of that. Okay. And let's see something else. Okay, so we got my border. Oh, my wrapper has a border of red. For testing, we get rid of that. So I'm going to get rid of all these things. Padding, and we have any other border. We have to look for other borders here, just to make sure we don't have any other borders that, you know, from a testing perspective, because we're getting closer to our final product. Oh, here's a border for our section. Get rid of that. We don't need that. Borders for me, unless you want to add them in for effect to highlight something, right? We take them out. And if you notice, one thing I never use is a horizontal rule, HR. Never use an HR tag. That's old school, right? Kind of avoid that as much as possible. All right, made a bunch of changes. Let's see how that affects our layout, and refresh. Now we have those borders gone, and so you can't tell, right? And it looks a little better, a bit of a two-column layout where you have photos on the left and content on the right. And I think it's a great place to pause, right? And take a break. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and we'll come back for the next piece.